Jumping from the late 90s to the early 2000s, one of the most important events in the original World of Darkness timeline was the Week of Nightmares, an event that not only brought drastic change to every existing game line, but also led to the events that would spawn several lesser-known games, like Mummy, Demon, Orpheus, and even Hunter: The Reckoning. So, what exactly was the Week of Nightmares? Well, first we need to establish some backstory. The Ravnos clan of vampires, a group of tricksters, illusionists, and Romani stereotypes, considered India to be their ancestral homeland. The only problem was that India is a part of Asia, and thus, technically under the control of the Kuei Jin. Kuei Jin are a whole other matter, but basically, they're vampires who don't descend from Cain and largely hold domain in the East. The Kindred don't like the Kuei Jin, and the Kuei Jin don't like the Kindred. Thus, war. In most places and points in time, the war between Kuei Jin and Kindred has always been rather cold, with the two sides spending most of history yelling insults at each other from across the street. That changed near the end of the 20th century, when the fear of Gehenna was at a fever pitch, and with it, the infighting that had always been present in vampiric society, but never as intense as it was in the 90s. With the Kindred all suddenly turning on each other, the Kuei Jin at large decided that now would be the best time for them to strike out at their enemies. Thus, the Cold War in India suddenly turned very, very hot. With the Kuei Jin's superior numbers, the Ravnos fared rather poorly during the early years of the war. In desperation, they turned to the tactic of mass embrace, where they would turn a large number of vampires in a short period of time and throw them at the problem like cannon fodder. As it often does, the mass embraces led to a number of clanless and thin bloods being thrust into the front lines of battle. Before we continue our story, allow me to explain something that most vampire elders missed about the whole thin blood thing. See, a large concentration of thin bloods in the same place on their own wouldn't have any effect on the ancients sleeping in the area. Now, killing those thin bloods would, as the smell of so much food in one place would bring a Methuselah out of the deepest of torpor. So, the pogrom carried out against thin bloods actually sped up the ancients' awakening rather than slow it down. So yeah, as you can imagine, a bunch of vampires being killed in what was essentially a vampiric holy land ended up drawing the attention of a startling number of Methuselah. Once those ancients snacked on a few of their own children, they turned their attention to the Kuei Jin. While the Ravnos ancients had incredible power compared to the Kuei Jin, they still had their casualties during the war. As the potent Methuselah blood was spilled, its scent found its way to the big man himself, the first Ravnos, Zapathasura. As vampires age, they need more potent blood to slake their hunger. By 1999, Zapathasura had been asleep for 10 million years, and it's doubtful even the blood of Methuselahs could have satisfied him. By June of 1999, one of the 13 vampires of the biblical third generation had awoken. The end of the world was about to arrive ahead of schedule. The reverberations of Zapathasura's awakening weren't just felt on the battlefield of India. People all around the world, supernatural and mortal alike, began suffering from horrible nightmares and hallucinations, babbling about the king and how he had split the mountain and was preparing to consume his children. 4 shapes, a crane, a dragon, a tiger, and a taloned, fanged humanoid, were seen causing a storm in the Shadowlands, and the entire Horizon Pocket Dimension was wiped out, leaving most of Earth's most powerful mages stranded in the Umbra. Back on the battlefield with Zapathasura's awakening, almost every sort of supernatural creature joined in on the war in India. The Kuei Jin called upon the Bodhisattva, 3 of the most powerful vampires among their ranks. One of the Bodhisattva conjured a storm large enough to blot out the sun, allowing the vampires to continue their battle into the daytime. However, in the end, the battle was truly won by the Technocratic Union. I go more in depth on who the Technocracy are in my videos on Mage the Ascension, but in essence, they're mages who prefer a more scientific approach to magic. Upon Zapathasura's awakening, the Technocracy began Code Ragnarok, a mission that allowed an infinite budget and unlimited casualties.
A few tens of thousands of lives to save 6 billion now, and countless billions to come. A rational transaction.
So, what did Code Ragnarok entail? First, the Technocracy used their satellites to direct sunlight directly onto the battlefield, essentially shining 4 suns down on India. When they found that they couldn't penetrate the Bodhisattva's storm, they said screw it and dropped a nuclear bomb on India that reduced most of the combatants to ash. Except, of course, for Zapathasura himself. Thankfully, the explosion, combined with the final death of all of the Bodhisattva, blew the storm away, and Zapathasura was helpless as he was hit with the power of 4 suns and crumbled to dust, finally ending the Week of Nightmares. The shockwave sent out by Zapathasura's death wiped out the majority of the Ravnos clan, reducing their numbers to the degree that they are no longer considered a proper vampire clan. The destruction of the Horizon Realm all but ended the Ascension War between the Technocracy and the Council of 9 Mystic Traditions. But those pale in comparison to the sheer destruction caused by the 6th Great Maelstrom. Around the time of the Week of Nightmares, the Shadowlands, a sort of limbo in the world of darkness, were at war. Stygia, the afterlife of the West, was under assault by the forces of the Yellow Springs, the afterlife of the East. Meanwhile, Anubis, the ruler of the Egyptian afterlife, discovered the existence of Enoch, the vampiric afterlife. The vampires and Anubis's mummies had been at war for centuries, so it's no surprise that discovering his most hated enemies had a stronghold in the Shadowlands pissed Anubis off to no end. So, in retaliation, he decided to use the Shadowland equivalent of a nuke to destroy Enoch, just as the Technocracy were dropping their nukes on Zapathasura in the physical realm. The resulting spiritual fallout threw the Shadowlands into chaos. Evil wraiths called specters erupted from oblivion and wreaked havoc on everything and everyone they came across. After a powerful wraith tried and failed to flee into the physical realm, a number of wraiths were thrown into the physical world as ghosts and zombies. In addition, the demons who had sided with Lucifer in the war against God were suddenly freed from the Abyss, a pocket of oblivion reserved specifically to hold them. In the end, the Shadowlands were consumed by chaos, and the most hectic period in the history of the world of darkness was over.